Welcome to the ReGen Brands podcast. This is a place for consumers, operators, and investors to learn about the consumer brands supporting regenerative agriculture and how they're changing the world. This is your host, Kyle, joined with my co-host, AC. Let's dive in.
On this episode, we have Justin Mayers, who is a serial entrepreneur and the founder of Kettle Fire. Kettle Fire sells bone broths and soups and is supporting regenerative agriculture through their regenerative beef and chicken broth. In this episode, we learn about Justin's journey from tech employee to CPG entrepreneur, how he built Kettle Fire from scratch, and how they put together the regenerative supply chain for their two ReGen broth SKUs. Now, this one was a little different since Kyle works with Justin at Kettle Fire, but they kept it professional, at least most of the time. Now, in all seriousness, we really enjoyed having Justin on. He is a super dynamic person and entrepreneur that we love to see supporting regenerative agriculture. Let's dive in. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the ReGen Brands podcast. We are fired up today to have Justin from Kettle Fire. So welcome, Justin.
Thank you for having me. Stoked to be here.
Absolutely, man.
Awesome. There's gonna be a bunch of weird, awkward moments here because Justin and I know each other pretty well, and we have a general tendency to want to make fun of each other and to make each other break character and laugh. So this might get weird. Just want to preface that for everybody who's listening, right up front.
Yeah. For those that don't know why you know each other, Kyle, say why so the audience knows.
I'm one of Justin's minions. He's got 1 million employees across the world. I'm just one of the few lucky ones who gets to work for this guy.
Yeah, I feed Kyle, so.
There you go.
Quite literally. And there's actually more than money, food is my biggest incentive. So if it was $500 of food or $1,000 bonus, I'd probably opt for the food.
Noted.
But anyways, we'll go ahead and yeah, right. Yeah. Easy for you. We'll go ahead and get started. We'll dive in. So Justin, for everybody who is not familiar with Kettle Fire, give us a quick lay of the land as far as what kind of products you make, where can you be found, what's your distribution look like, and things like that.
Yeah, so the origin story is that we're basically in 15,000 different stores. Kettle Fire was one of the first bone broth companies that really came to market, and so we launched in August of 2015, first online. Bringing bone broth as one of the first, high quality bone broth products. So now we have a line of bone broths, a line of bone broth based soups, and a line of cooking broths, all made with super high quality ingredients, grass fed, grass finished bones, as well as a regenerative line that we launched recently.
Love it.
Nice.
And Justin, I feel like you've started 1,000 businesses, so maybe we'll dive into that more later on in the podcast. I get your newsletter and it's rock solid and it's fun to learn about all your entrepreneurial endeavors. But what was the impetus for a bone broth company? What was the origin story there?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we started in August 2015, as I said, and basically there were two things that kind of happened around the same time. I was living in San Francisco at the time. I was doing a bunch of CrossFit, and the CrossFit community, especially then, was super early on the paleo and food as medicine sort of trains. And so I had a lot of friends in the CrossFit community that were using and starting to incorporate bone broth into their diet, both from a gut health standpoint and also from I need to recover from these brutally challenging workouts standpoint. Mm-hmm. And so at the time, I both didn't know how to cook at all and was traveling all the time. And so basically couldn't make bone broth myself, even though I wanted to incorporate it into my diet. So that happened. And then a month or two later, after I had personally experienced this problem, my brother, he tore pretty much everything you can tear in your knee playing soccer. And so he was looking for foods that could help with his recovery. He lived in Philadelphia or outside of Philadelphia, where our family is from, and was basically hey, Justin, what can I do to help me recover from this pretty brutal surgery that I just went through? I recommended bone broth, and he couldn't find any on the East Coast. I couldn't find any good stuff on the West Coast. And so decided, there probably should be a high quality version of this product that exists. And as we dug into it, we learned a lot more about why the opportunity was compelling, both from a business standpoint, but also from a nutrition and function standpoint, which I can ramble on about if you guys are interested.
Yeah, please.
So when we were just kind of digging into this, we realized two things. One, that bone broth is actually a key source of full spectrum amino acids, collagens, and nutrients that the average American just doesn't get in their diet. Like as a culture, we pretty much have no organ meats, no bone marrow, no like connective joint tissue that we work into our diets. And yet, if you look at, most other cultures, hunter-gatherer or other sort of like traditional food cultures, organ meats are prized and like incorporated into food at almost every chance that they can. And so if you're the average American, you're like almost only eating cuts of muscle meat, and you're missing out on this full spectrum amino acids and collagen that were in, humanity's diets for millions of years. Bone broth is sort of like a uniquely positioned food product that delivers on those nutritional benefits in a way that many others don't. The second thing we realized is that like bone broth used to be in everything. Like people used to make, there's a reason that like Jewish grandmas are like, oh, have a bowl of, chicken soup when you get sick. It's because of like the functional benefits of bone broth and all of these nutrients. However, in like starting in the 80s, Campbell's and a bunch of these other companies that used to use real bones in their like broth, stocks, soups, all this sort of stuff, switched to water as part of like big foods, big cost cutting initiatives in the 70s and 80s. And so we just saw that there was this like ancient, super nutritious, highly functional food that was literally not in anyone's diet today. And, the big food companies were not really delivering on. So that's why we decided to start Kettle Fire.
Did you have a background in CPG, or did you know anything
No.
about CPG? What was the story there?
No, literally nothing. No, I didn't know literally how to do any of this. So I didn't work in CPG. I worked in tech. I was like, working at a software company that sold software to software developers. It was like as far from health and vitality and functional foods as you could imagine. And so we had to figure out this stuff a lot on our own. And on the one hand, that meant that we made massive mistakes, like not hiring a finance team for the first 2 years of the company. And it also meant that we like thought about things a little differently. And so it meant that we like, went direct to consumer at a time where that was not a thing that like food companies were doing. It meant that we like hired an all remote team, and like we truly may have been one of the first all remote teams in like consumer land. It's just like we did some things differently. Some worked, some didn't. But yeah, it was mostly me muddling through and being confused about how to build a business. Has sort of been the story of the company.
It's worked out pretty well so far. I mean, I continue to be fed, which is the most important thing, and that's a good sign. So company started in 2015. Walk us through your arc between, because Kettle Fire was not started to be a regenerative company, right? So you, since starting Kettle Fire, have learned about regen ag and then decided to incorporate some of those production methods into, I keep trying not to say our products, but I can't really help it, our product line. So walk us through your arc of awareness around regenerative agriculture, and then how and why you decided to incorporate that at Kettle Fire.
Totally. Yeah, so it's a good question. I think that I'm just like personally very interested in health, both from an environmental and personal standpoint. And so when I got into Kettle Fire, it was like, oh wow, bone broth, this big cool thing, like, new product that has all these health benefits. Like that's just like inherently exciting to me. And as we kind of operated and ran the company, grew the company, we were one of the first companies doing the grass-fed, grass-finished thing at the time, where I was like, oh, I think grass-fed, grass-finished is like the pinnacle of health. You like couldn't even, can't get any healthier than that. And as I learned more and talked to ranchers and talked to operators in the space, and like read and just sort of like got a better understanding of not only like how the health of animals and our food system impact human health, but also how our agricultural system impacts the health of our planet and the environment. It became clear to me that like, and honestly too, a big piece of this was reading and being exposed a lot to like the Impossibles, the Beyond Burgers, like this narrative that, the beef is the problem, is like the climate problem. And
you're living in San Fran. You're surrounded by probably an army of vegans that are telling you you're an idiot or something,
Totally, man. I mean, it was like I had many people, included one memorable heated debate at a birthday party with someone that worked at Impossible, but I had a lot of people that were like very, very anti the beef thing, and we're all in on Impossible and Beyond and like this sort of fake meat will save the planet view. And as I dug into that, I was like, there's something that feels off about this like You know, the way to save the planet is to buy our high margin, highly processed products kind of view of the world. And as I talked to more people, I was like, you know, digging in. I don't think that industrial agriculture has an answer for the impossible and beyonds. I don't think that like grass-fed, grass-finished, like that doesn't really have an environmental answer. Like the only real philosophy and worldview to me that felt coherent from a like, this is how the world becomes a better place from a health, environmental, and animal, you know, ethics and health standpoint was the regenerative movement. And so I started getting into it in late 2018, 2019, went to like some conferences in the Bay Area, met a bunch of people that were like just getting into the regenerative space. And as I learned more, I was like, wow, there's like really strong, in my opinion, philosophical underpinnings to this movement. And I think that like, I'm way more here for and bullish on a movement that like goes, you know, that incorporates the health of the environment, animals, people, everything into its philosophy and worldview than I am in thinking that like the climate is going to be saved by 2 fake meat companies that are just like further perpetuating a hyper centralized, hyper industrialized food system that like I think it's pretty clear doesn't really work well.
Let's end the
That's
interview.
how I got into it.
Good. Hey, that's cool. Good
I was going to say, I was just thinking to myself, that's going to be a great clip. That's a perfect clip. Fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, like in the world without silver bullets, like Regen Ag is the silver bullet. And like obviously I'm super drinking the Kool-Aid and super on that team, but like please someone tell me like really thoughtfully and scientifically explain how I'm wrong, because I haven't seen somebody that can do it. And like it's just it's awesome.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I just wish that like, I'm excited to see the movement getting as much traction as it is, and maybe I should just be patient. But I wish that people would be as excited to fund regenerative companies and the like as they are to fund, you know, the impossibles and beyonds. Maybe that sort of stuff is like coming, where you could make the argument that regenerative agriculture is as profitable and or has as great profit potential as like beyond and impossible when you incorporate like carbon recapture and a bunch of these externalities that aren't like priced in the system today. But you know, that's sort of my hope as to where how this movement starts to make sense to like big money, private equity and investor types.
Well, let's kind of go off topic here, because I know Yvonne Entrepreneur is a big, you know, idol for you, Justin, and some big news just came out yesterday that I'm sure you've already read. Actually, I know you've read it because I read Daily Tonic this morning. You know, you mentioned the difficulty for the investment community to fund like the regenerative space right now. What do you think about what he's doing, and how do you think the ripple effects might change that narrative?
Yeah. So how do I think about what he's doing in terms of like giving away the company?
Yeah, and the way specifically that he did. You know, he didn't just like give it to the employees, but creating the trust and all like that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I mean, there's a lot of like interesting corporate governance experience going on. Like you see this in B Corps, you see this in you know, and stuff that he's doing. You see this in like even in like the crypto space, like DAOs are kind of doing some interesting potential stuff around like more decentralized governance. I think it's really cool, and I'm glad that we're running more experiments. I tend to think though that like I think that it'll for someone at his age, you know, he's pretty old. He's probably like starting to do succession planning, or that, I mean, that's definitely what this was. I think that it's really like a smart thing, and it's probably better than just giving it to someone where you hope that the person that you give the company to, or that like is running the company, has your values and can fight off the like economic draw towards making worse products that are worse for the environment and worse for people every single year as long as they run the company. So in that sense, I think that establishing the guardrails in the way that he's doing it is awesome. I still though think the jury is out on B Corps and some of these other things, just because I think that it's really tough to serve 2 masters. And like in a competitive environment, if you have a corporation that's like going to profit maximize versus one that has to like serve or satisfy 2 different things, both like building a valuable company and, you know, operating within certain guidelines, I think it's tough. And so like if I could kind of wave a magic wand, I think that probably the like change making mechanism that needs to happen, or that I would love to see happen, is having more pricing of like negative externalities, like carbon emissions, carbon recapture, other things, so that everyone is sort of like on a much more even playing field, and can optimize for, hey, let's make the best company possible, but like the government or some larger institution is imposing these constraints that lead to a better environment. Like I ultimately think that, you know, it's great that Patagonia is that they're doing this, but I do wonder if to some extent these sorts of structures are like planting the seeds to just be outcompeted and, you know, lose to a company that doesn't have these sorts of guardrails in place. I don't know, but it's very early. I'm glad the experiment's being run. All by Patagonia.
Gotcha.
Cover, so.
What I think of when you hear you say that is agree on a lot of those points, and we just won't know for quite some time whether it works or not.
Yeah.
And it is easier for a company like Patagonia that's 50 years old and clearly been profitable for a long time to do something like that than you know, lots of others in the space. And when I think of CPG, especially early stage CPG, that ramp to profitability is usually so intense and so capital intensive and so long. It might be 5 million, it might be 10 million, it might not be till 50 million, right? And so what are those other levers, like you said, like pricing externalities or other things that can kind of level that playing field? Because ultimately there is no sustainability without profitability. And so that's got to be number one. It can't come at too high of a cost to where you lose your values and you just degrade everything else. But there's like this crazy web of all these kind of data points pulling at each other, I guess.
Totally. Yeah. I sort of feel like some of this stuff is like, it's like union logic applied to corporate governance, where like sometimes unions are like, try to just maximize and like rip all of the profits out of a company, and they end up killing companies, and, you know, companies shut down because they have union disputes or whatever. And like on the whole, yes, maybe some small unions were left better off, but on the whole, they've just like removed a bunch of companies that were treating them relatively well and like are in a worse position. And I wonder if the same thing happens from you know, this like B Corp style movement. But again, I'm not sure. Also, disclaimer, I'm like not a very smart person, so this is just me like thinking out loud. I'm probably wrong about a lot of this.
No, I'm curious though, if you were to start a new regenerative CPG business today, what sort of markets would you be looking at? How would you approach, you know, entering the market? You know, what categories are you interested in? Tell us what that would look like.
Yeah, so I think it's an interesting question. I don't know that I would start a consumer. I would basically think about it in a couple ways. I'd look at like, where are the categories where there's like a lot of consumers are like spending a lot of money, where like the input ingredients or the things they're putting in their bodies are like basically commodities right now, and where the practices to create those commodities are like not very good. For me, that would probably lead me down the supplement route, if I'm being totally honest. Like, I think that if you look at like vital proteins or, you know, collagen supplements, if you look at like a bunch of like the massive supplement category, I literally have no idea like how, when you eat a vitamin D supplement, like one, what is that? Second, how does that get made? Like, I have truly no idea. You know, I know how some of the collagen supplements are made, and it's like not that appealing, and animal health is like maybe not at the forefront of how they're just making those decisions. And so, yeah, I think that that's probably like a category that I would look a lot into from a regenerative standpoint. But that said, I still think that if I were to like fully start from scratch another regenerative brand or regenerative focused company right now, I think I would want to take the approach of having a, like, I would want to figure out, like, is there a way that you could benefit from either land appreciation, carbon recapture, any sort of like of the positive externalities that the regenerative movement creates? Yeah, I think that you want to capture that in your company in some way, because otherwise you're just buying a higher quality product and selling it for a premium price to a consumer, and you're leaving a lot of positive externalities on the table. I think if you capture those in some way as a company, then you are like creating a lot more value and have the opportunity to realize a lot more of that value, which means that you'll be a more competitive company, which means that you can continue to like enact your regenerative values for, you know, 5, 10, 20 years is kind of how I think about it.
Yeah. There's another podcast called the Investing in Regen Ag podcast that a dude named Kuhn over in Europe has, don't know if you guys have listened to it, but yeah, he's the man. I was just on it, and he always asked people, "What would you do with $1 billion fund?" And my answer was like easy. It was like I would buy as much degraded row crop land as I could. I would transition it into multi-species pastured livestock. I would get vertically integrated processing, and I'd have a brand that sells pastured eggs, chicken, pork, and grass-fed beef, all pasteurized. And like that to me is where you get the land, you get the real assets piece, you get the processing to manage the margin, you get the end product consumer to manage the brand, the storytelling, and then you invest in media and research to kind of bring all that together. But like that's the dream. So whoever's out there that wants to help raise $1 billion to do that, I'm in. Whatever.
Yeah.
Whoever's ready to do
totally. I think if I had $1 billion and wanted to promote the ReGen movement, I'm actually not even sure. I think I would do it in like a sideways way where I would actually like probably spend 200 million on trying to like lobby to either remove crop subsidies or add subsidies around regeneratively raised products and whatnot, whether that's like livestock and, fruits, vegetables, all that sort of stuff. That feels like such a big leverage point that a lot of people are not necessarily focused on, or just lobby to like, have the government basically invest in carbon recapture on agricultural lands and like give bonuses for doing that and just make it much more profitable to be a regenerative farmer than it is to, strip mine a bunch of Midwest land for its nutrients and then have the topsoil degrade and flow off.
Absolutely.
So when are you going to run for office and just like
Never.
All right,
I couldn't imagine a worse thing to do for my quality of life.
Okay. I feel like we've gotten so far off track, it's hard to get back on track. Like I'm not even sure where the conversation is going to head at this point.
I got a question. So non purely regen question, but about bone broth. Obviously, super sleepy category when you came in. Not a lot of innovation. You guys have you pumped out so many SKUs, so many cool innovations in that category. Take us through this like the product development arc, right? Because there's the regen piece in there, but then there's also like these ready-made soups now instead of just the broth. So like I want to get into the nitty-gritty of just pure CPG strategy, how that all came together and what you learned and saw there.
Yeah, so we started first with a beef bone broth. Basically, like we saw that there's a rising interest in like grass-fed, grass-finished. No one had a grass-fed, grass-finished like broth stock, much less a bone broth. No one knew what bone broth was, and so we were like, okay, this is probably a good place to start. We'll come out with a premium product. We'll be the first one using grass-fed, grass-finished, and one of the first players in the bone broth space. From there, it was like chicken was a super obvious one. And then beyond that, it was like we surveyed and talked to our customers and we found that like they were drinking our product. And, if you like walk down the broth and stock aisle and ignore Kettle Fire, like no one is buying like Pacific stock, and like drinking that on a regular basis because A, it tastes bad, and B, it has like almost no nutritional value. And so on our case, we found that because it tasted good and it actually had nutritional value and customers were like drinking bone broth for their gut, skin, and joint health, that they actually wanted flavors. And we were like, oh, well, that seems interesting. Like the reason that you don't see a ton of flavored broths and stocks in the center of the aisle is because no one's drinking those products. As soon as people are like drinking them and like the taste actually matters when you're experiencing the product directly, as opposed to just working it into a soup or like cooking rice in it or whatever. You have the opportunity to introduce flavors and other function. So we did that as our next lineup. We also saw that consumers were using it in soups. So we launched a line of bone broth based soups with similar like nutrient dense bone broth profiles, but a convenient kind of meal that they could eat on the go. And that was sort of like our main innovation focus until we launched Regenerative last summer, I guess it was. And then that was Regenerative was like less of a consumer facing innovation. Like if you don't know what Regenerative is, you're like, okay, I can buy Kettle Fire beef bone broth, or I can buy their more expensive beef bone broth. Like, sweet, thanks for the options, guys. But it took a lot of supply chain innovation and work on our end just to find, certify, just like do a bunch of work to basically make a product that we could stand behind. And because we were working on it very early in the regenerative movement, I would say. Like we were getting on calls with Whole Foods where we had to educate their buyers about like, what is regenerative? Why is it interesting? Why is this not regenerative organic? And, like walk them through a bunch of like the nuances of the regenerative movement and like why we made certain product decisions that we did.
Yeah, I'd love to hear more about the supply chain and how you set all that up, even just at the beginning for grass-fed, grass-finished, and also for ReGen. I think our audience would be super intrigued by that.
Yeah, so early on, we didn't know what we were doing. And so we were basically just like calling and emailing a bunch of different ranchers, producers, and just being like, hey, we're trying to do this grass-fed, grass-finished thing. How do we source bones in X quantity, in this size? We spent a lot of time, like some of these things sound simple, like sourcing bones and then you cook them and then you put them in the product. For us, we spent so much time trying to figure out like, okay, where do we source bones that are grass-fed, grass-finished, where their quality and raising standards are up to ours? Then like what bone mix do you use is like a thing that you just never think about. Like we basically had to find the bones that had the highest collagen and amino acid content per like cooking, chunk of cooking time. Yeah, like just a weird thing.
That's crazy. Yeah.
Like you make bone broth at home and you're like, whatever, I'm throwing like the whole chicken carcass in, it's fine.
Yeah.
It happens with this whole little stock pot. You're not like measuring the nutritionals. You're not doing a bunch of stuff.
Wait, what are the best bones? What are the best bones? I got to interject.
Kyle, do you know?
Femur, knuckle, patella, those are the biggies. But I wanted to have you dive in and I'm trying not to talk here because it's like Justin's sort of doing my job. He's selling bone broth right now, so I'm just trying to watch and learn. But the bone selection I think is one of the most unique parts about Kettle and Fire versus a lot of the other bone broths in the space. You never see that on the back of a package. It doesn't say like knuckle bone, femur bone, patella bone. It'll just say bones, or it won't say bones. And right now, there's not really any regulation in the bone broth category as far as like who can claim bone broth on the front of a label and whether or not it actually has real bones in it, which, to Justin's point earlier, really diminishes the potential nutritional quality of the product. So it's sort of this weird unregulated space right now. Think kombucha before like the DUI incident, right? So it's a challenge for us as a company to figure out how do we accurately communicate the fact that we are indeed higher quality. We do all these things, not on pack. It's really hard. But Justin knows more about what everybody else has in their products. So curious to dig into that a little bit.
Yeah, it's really hard. So we basically, I think you had asked like, how did we, what was setting up our supply chain like? We just had to spend so much time, so much energy figuring out the ideal mix of bones. Like our first batch of bone broth, which we made, was like, we didn't know what cuts of bones to use. We didn't really understand like cook times. We didn't really understand a bunch of trade-offs. And we didn't understand even like how to cook them. Like basically if you have, a stock pot and you're throwing bones into it and you're cooking it for 24 hours, you eat it at home, whatever. It's like such a small amount of liquid. And so it just kind of blends together. When you're making bone broth in 2,000 like gallon steel drums, and you load the bones at the bottom, what you get is like a super rich and hearty bone broth at the bottom, and then like more and more watery stuff as you get to the top. And so what we didn't realize is like, this is just an example of like doing anything is hard as soon as you dig into the details. What we didn't realize is like, if you're opening the bottom of these steel drums, roughly the first 60 to 70% of your bone broth or of the cartons you're filling are like really delicious. And the last 30% are basically water. And like customers who get basically water boxes are like not stoked about that. So we had to figure out like, how do we install paddles that like churn this stuff and like evenly distribute it. It's just a lot of work.
Wow.
This stuff out.
One of the other things that was tough in the beginning, and Justin, you can probably tell more about this story than I can, but it's when you go to a co-packing facility that makes broth and you're asking for a 24-hour cook to tie up their lines for 24 hours for a category that doesn't exist. They're like, no, like, leave us alone. You don't know what you're doing. Like, you're a tech guy, or an 18-year-old kid. Like, get away from us. So,
exactly.
What was that like?
Yeah, I mean, so we contacted almost 500 different co-packers. A co-packer is just someone that, like, manufactures your product. Yeah, it took a long time.
Wow.
Yeah. And I mean, the most common response was like, uh, who are you? And, like you don't have any background in the space. It didn't help my brother that I started the company with, when we started it, he was 19. And so it was like, who are you? Have you hit puberty yet? We weren't funded by anyone. This was not a category that existed. And so it
Yeah.
was just like a very hard sell. Like they were like, wait, you're going to tell us to change the way we do our operations. You're going to like be the longest thing we cook by like a factor of 10. And this isn't a market, and you're not funded, and I don't know who you are, and you have no consumers. It's like, why on earth, why am I even talking to you? You know what I mean?
They were fired up to talk to you. They were pumped up.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was rough. Like from figuring out how to actually make the product and like find someone that would take us on as a customer was a big challenge.
I mean,
So
coordinating
what about
all that on top of
sourcing?
it.
Yeah. I was going to say, what were the challenges in finding the new suppliers for the regenerative product lines? The ReGen beef and the ReGen chicken. What were the goals, and why did we end up choosing the partners Kettle and Fire chose?
Yeah, so there were a lot of things. When we started looking into this was 2020, and basically like at that time and still today, there are not a lot of regenerative suppliers or like farmers, ranchers, and the like that are following regenerative principles. And that's not because like these people are evil. It's because like we're very early in this movement, and I think that it takes time. Like if you talk to anyone, like Katie and Taylor from Force of Nature slash Epic, they're doing a regenerative farm outside Austin where I live. They're awesome. And they're like years into this, and they're just now starting to like really see the benefits of the regenerative transition. The soil health is coming back online, all this stuff. And so all that to say is like, if you were looking for a regenerative supplier in 2020, you better hope that like some rancher or farmer was into regenerative agriculture before like I even knew it was a thing. You know what I mean? And like that, not to say like, wow, I'm some hot trendsetter. It's just like, this is like a thing that there's not a ton of awareness even today. And for those people that are aware, they had to be aware of it and working on it for multiple years. And so it's really tough to find those partners. We eventually found some. We also like with some of them, basically agreed to like, hey, this is going to be an investment we're going to make from a product standpoint. And so our guarantee and like the size of our brand and distribution base meant that we could go to some partners and be like, hey, you have a small regenerative operation right now. If you want to like transition more towards regenerative, like we can actually help make more financial sense for you, because we're going to like be a good partner for you for the next, 5, 10, 15, however long years. And so, yeah, but it was a lot of just getting intros, finding suppliers, talking to them, a lot of talking to suppliers that like said they were regenerative, but maybe necessarily weren't, or maybe missing on a couple areas that we cared about. A lot of like talking to them and getting, soil nutrient density tests and carbon samples and like all this sort of stuff, interviewing them about their supply chain and their ranching and growing practices, like all these sorts of things. So it was a lot of work that I would say our team hadn't necessarily done before, because like people really haven't done that before. It's like, getting a regenerative supply chain, it's like a very new thing.
And why did we decide to launch 2 specific regenerative SKUs as opposed to just making our entire product line regenerative?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the reality is that like, as bullish as I am on regenerative agriculture, the regenerative movement, I think, will really start to take off once like there's consumer demand for it. Like you saw this in the 80s when organic became a thing. It's like for a while, there's like all these weird mom and pop stores that are selling organic foods and no one knows what organic is. And so like, nothing really changes. Then consumers start to have a real pull and demand for organic foods, which means that companies like Whole Foods and others kind of Sprouts, came up to like serve that demand on the consumer side. Today, there's not that much demand. There's some, and it's growing, and it's great, but like there's not overwhelming demand for regenerative products. And so that means that there's not an overwhelming number of regenerative suppliers. And so like if we wanted to, we couldn't transition our like entire business to regenerative agriculture. Like there's just not enough suppliers, and our business is at enough size that it would just be, there's not enough supply of bones that fit our regenerative sort of criteria for us to transition the entire business to that, to regenerative so far. So our goal is like, we launched the regenerative line, increase demand, do our small part in increasing demand for regeneratively raised animals. We also do some consumer education, which hopefully increases demand for regenerative. And as we kind of do these two things, hopefully more suppliers go regenerative, which then means at some point we can transition more and more of our line until, 5-10 years out. Like, I would love to be a fully regenerative bone broth brand and have really played a role in making that happen.
Mm-hmm. And the economics don't work right now because you're premium priced as is. You're hyper premium or super premium probably for the 2 ReGen SKUs, as you need to be.
Yep.
And so, like I said earlier, you've worked in a lot of different businesses. So I'm super kind of curious to hear what's the macroeconomic for this deal, right? Because I do think it's consumer demand. We've talked about the subsidies earlier. I think both those are huge factors. Organic hasn't scaled to the level that we need it to or want it to, right? So we can't let the same thing happen to ReGen. So how do we avoid all that? I mean, that's the $1 million question. So curious your thoughts there.
Yeah. So I think that this is where, this is why I think a lot about externalities. Like, in some ways you could look at organic and be like, okay, why is that maybe challenging, or why hasn't that taken over the world yet? And I think that in many ways it's because, one, non-organic crops are highly subsidized. And two, all of the pesticide runoff and all of these other negative externalities that come with non-organic industrialized farming, they're not priced. There's no cost to them. A farmer just sprays their crops. It runs off into the water. It makes a bunch of people sick. It causes a bunch of disease of inflammation. And doesn't matter to the farmer. They're still making, as much money as they were had that not happened. And so what that means is the entire cost of the increased cost of going organic get 100% passed on to the consumer in effect. I think that, right now the same is true in regenerative. If you want to shop and eat regeneratively, that cost is getting passed on to the consumer, and the consumer is paying a premium. At the end of the day, I think that if there were carbon credits or carbon recapture credits or sort of any sort of thing that you could, any sort of a pro-environmental, pro-climate sort of economic plan, deal, whatever you want to call it, that regenerative farmers, landowners, and the like could take advantage of, where it makes it so that either it's more profitable to become a regenerative farmer, or you can make money by selling carbon credits and then lower the price of your regenerative products, so that to the consumer, they go, I can buy conventional or regenerative, cost is roughly the same. I'm going to go to ReGen every time. That's how I think that you see massive change in the system. Until then, though, I do think that unfortunately it's probably the consumer ends up paying a slightly higher price to eat regeneratively and healthy. Although there's also some other interesting ways around that, some of which I'm kind of working on. So we'll see. Yeah. It's complicated. Is all I would say.
You just took us there, so let's go there, because I think what you're working on is super cool, and I think our audience would be super interested in that. And I enjoyed reading about it kind of in the Daily Tonic and then your personal newsletter lately. So share what you have been working on there, Justin.
Yeah. So one of the core things, I think that one of the core challenges is in the US today, it is easier and cheaper to be unhealthy than it is to be healthy. Basically, you look at 11 of the top.
Say that again. Say that again for everybody. Say that again, because that's the soundbite that we need to get to.
Yeah. It is today in the US, it is easier and cheaper to be unhealthy than it is to be healthy. And you look at basically 11 of the 12 killers of America, top 12 killers of Americans are all related to chronic disease, which are all related to our food and food environment. And the big reason for that is a bunch of people make money, pharma, big food companies, big ag, all of this stuff, when you indulge in products that are highly processed, high margin, and are bad for you. And far fewer people make money when you have a healthy individual. And so one thing that I think is really important is I think it's really important to balance that equation. So, we're sort of on pace as a country to possibly go bankrupt in the next 20 years if we don't rein in our healthcare spending. It's approaching 20% of GDP. That's looking like it'll double in the next 20 years. And
God,
almost all
crazy.
of that. Yeah. And almost all of that is 85% of that is spending on chronic diseases. And so
that are preventable.
I think that, yeah, right. Like preventable, or at the very least addressable through like better lifestyle, food environment, and the like. And so I think that like a key thing that we have to figure out as like a country and a people is like, how do you make it so that it is not an economically dumb decision to be healthy? And so something that I'm working on is basically there's an interesting sort of potential like loophole here where are you familiar with like HSA or FSA accounts, like health savings accounts or flexible spending accounts? But it's basically this pool of money that consumers can use to spend on their like healthcare expenses. Today, that's used on like sunscreen, pharmaceuticals, surgeries, stuff like that. However, if you have a doctor that says, hey, you're someone at risk for X, Y, and Z chronic condition, which unfortunately is almost every American, because like almost everyone in the country is sick or at the risk of getting some sort of chronic disease. If you have a doctor that says, hey, you're at risk, all of a sudden you can spend pre-tax HSA, FSA funds on everyday health and wellness spend. And so we started something called True Medicine. It's truemedicine.care if anyone wants to check out the very basic website. But basically what we're trying to do, and we're like very early in thinking about, is how do you allow people to tap into pre-tax HSA, FSA funds that in a way so that they can spend it on everyday health and wellness spend, and thus kind of like balance the equation of, it's all of a sudden maybe more affordable to spend on healthy stuff than it is on unhealthy. Like if you're using pre-tax funds to buy something that has a 35% premium to a conventional product, that's basically a break even for you. You know what I mean? Like by using pre-tax funds, assuming you pay an income or make more than like $50,000 or $60,000 a year, you're saving anywhere between 20 and 45% on by using pre-tax dollars.
I want to dig in a little bit deeper because I think you mentioned wellness spend, right? So when you say wellness spend, that could potentially include healthier grocery options, or what all does that entail?
Yeah, so it includes healthier grocery options. Like there's basically 108 different foods that there's a large body of research shows is good for you. Grass-fed, grass-finished, meats are on that. A bunch of like well-sourced seafood is on that. Fruits, vegetables, nuts, stuff like that. And then outside of that, it also includes, like for many people, fitness spend. So, maybe like a Peloton, a gym membership, all these sorts of things are in that bucket of this is a thing that will help you be healthier and not sicker. And thus you could spend your HSA, FSA funds on that thing.
Right. So take the average, call it, relatively successful person in America who's probably getting taxed 20 to 30%, right? So you're saying they could take that money higher?
Oh, yeah.
25 to 35? No, we're not all in your tax bracket, Justin, just for the record.
No, I know. If you looked into the tax stuff, you'd be shocked.
It's higher.
Yeah.
Well, give us the numbers then. So what's the average person get taxed at?
I don't know about the average, but I mean, the average person doesn't pay income tax. So there's less than half of the country that is paying income tax. And I believe you start paying income tax at the level of, I think it's $60-something thousand a year. And if you look at like blended federal and state, most people are paying somewhere between 25 and 30%. That's kind of at the low end. And at the high end, people in California are paying upwards of 52% in the higher earning kind of income bracket.
Insane. Yeah. So what you're saying is we could potentially allocate their grocery spend, if it's on those designated 108 products that are deemed healthier by some body of research, and they could get pre-tax money to subsidize the premiums they're paying for those either regeneratively grown or organic or whatever type products. Is that right?
Yeah, basically, like you can, rather than saying, okay, I earn $1, I pay 30 cents in tax, and then I get to spend that 70 cents on food. You earn $1, you keep that dollar, and you spend that on, and you have higher purchasing power, which you can allocate towards brands and companies that are like investing in a better food system and are leading to a better, more economical, healthier, better environment, planet, people, all that stuff. Just better for you kind of foods. And by using that bucket of pre-tax spend, my hope is that all of a sudden the equation goes from like, God, I'm spending so much extra to eat organic, grass-fed, regenerative, whatever, to like, I can actually invest in my health through this channel, because there's this like nice little kind of legal and tax advantage that I get from actually investing in preventative care. And as far as I know, this is literally the only mechanism by which you can use where there's a tax advantage or any sort of like insurer or other reimbursement advantage to investing in preventative medicine or preventative care. It's crazy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So let's say I want to sign up. I want to take advantage of this. Like, what do I need to do?
You go to truemedicine.care and you'd sign up, fill out a quick survey that around some of your like health and wellness, family history. It's like takes like 5 minutes, potential things that you're at risk for. We would then pair you with a physician who would, if assuming you qualify, like issue something called a letter of medical necessity. That letter of medical necessity effectively allows you to use your HSA or FSA card on everyday like health and wellness spend. And then True Medicine basically works to like help make sure that you stay in compliance and can take advantage of this sort of like bucket of HSA, FSA spend for everyday health and wellness stuff. So we'll partner with you for a year and like do all of the grunt work on from a tax compliance, telling you what to buy, what brands are good, what brands aren't, what food products, fitness things qualify, all that sort of stuff. So basically like walk you through using this tax advantage bucket of spend on health and wellness stuff.
Incredible.
I love it.
We'll see.
If you don't have,
early. Who knows? Next time I'm on this, I could be like, "Yep, that bombed. I was an idiot."
Words of a true serial entrepreneur. I love it. Is there any loopholes for people that don't have HSAs or FSAs? Like, is there a way to do that medical letter and then like get a tax break on the back end? Like, have you researched that at all?
Yeah, unfortunately not. It's definitely an area that we're like looking into, but unfortunately, I think like HSA FSA is the best thing today that exists for you to like get, take advantage of this sort of spend. Yeah.
Well, we're talking money. So let's go back to Kettle and Fire. We've been like frogs jumping from lily pads, but I think we've done it in a nice little symphony. So how have you funded
what a beautiful
the company?
Metaphor. Wow.
I mean, come on, dog. I got the metaphors and analogies. How have you funded the company today, and how has that like take us through the fundraising arc of the company and how that's corresponded to various like milestones for the business?
Yeah, so we started the business. When we started the business, I basically emptied my savings account to pay for our first production run.
Committed.
We bought 30,000. Yeah, we bought 30,000 cartons of bone broth, which fortunately it's shelf stable, so it was a savings account in just a different form. But I basically had to like empty out my savings account. And that's how we
quite literally in liquid form. Savings account.
Yeah, literally, you liquidated it.
I am highly liquid.
Yes.
So we funded it basically that way. Like our first production one was just literally my savings, and then borrowed a tiny bit of money from my parents. I think it was like $2,000 or something that they helped chip in, and I paid for most of it. And then after that, we ran the company for 18 months. We were profitable. Somehow we didn't have a finance team, so we had no idea how profitable we were. But like our sort of guesses got us through the first, 18 months. And so we were profitable because we were selling a product online at $12. Like the same box you can buy today at the store for $7.49 is like, it's $12 back in the day. And so we were profitable. And then 18 months later, we got into Whole Foods. We got into 50 Whole Foods in 2 regions, and we were like, this product is moving incredibly well. And we were selling it at $9.99 with no marketing support, no salespeople, just us like fulfilling POs and like hoping that they sold, And and one SKU, it was like one tiny SKU on the top shelf at $9.99. I don't know, maybe people were buying it as a prank or something, but if for whatever reason, it was moving. Yeah. And so at that point we were like, okay, we had an opportunity, and I believe we got Whole Foods national approval, and they were like, great, this is going to be expensive to do this rollout. We should probably raise money. So we raised about $900K in 2017, I believe, early 2017. And then that rollout went well. Our retail numbers continued to be really strong. And as we got further down the road, we saw that there was a bigger and bigger opportunity in the bone broth space. And so in 2018, we decided to raise $16 million from some like
Wow.
well-known consumer investors, and that kind of funded the rollout from like I think it was 2,000 or 3,000 stores to now the 15,000 that we're in, and so we're now we've raised almost $20 million total, and today we're like profitable and in a good spot as a company.
Love it.
Yeah,
love it, man.
It's been fun.
Emptying the savings account for the first production run. Oh, baby, that was probably a fun one.
Yeah, it was interesting.
Yeah, scary,
but it worked out. Yeah, definitely scary, but it was also like I believed in like our early metrics were good, and I like believed in the category and our ability to build something more than I did like any sort of stock portfolio at the time. So I think it ended up being a good move.
Although the number of ironies in just like the category, maybe, but I mean stock, chicken stock, I don't know. Too many weird things.
Yeah, I bought a lot of stocks.
Liquid, stock, broth, whatever. So this is a question we ask everybody at the end. I feel like we've already kind of addressed it twice, so I'm going to challenge you to come up with a different answer. But what needs to happen for regenerative brands to have 50% market share by 2050? And you can't say externalities.
Good question. Well, interestingly enough, I think that we are going to find out that I'll say a couple things. I think one, I won't say externalities, but like there's a lot of climate and climate related investing that's happening. And I think that as it becomes more apparent that regenerative agriculture, in my opinion, is one of the best vectors for making climate change, like you could actually see a lot more people putting ESG earmarked dollars into regenerative agriculture, which would just mean that more people would transition over to regenerative and like chase that pile of money. I think that would be a broadly very good thing. So I think that that's like one macro trend that would go a long way. And like if people are investing in regenerative farmland, and you could prove that like farming and ranching regeneratively led to more carbon uptake or whatever, there's like a pretty nice equation where you could say, okay, there's just going to be a lot more people farming regeneratively, which brings price down, which means that more people will buy it. That's sort of one thing. The second thing I think that is interesting is like today we're like pretty blind to the nutrient density of our foods. Like if you go to the grocery store, like you buy an apple and it's like an apple. Like you don't really know what's the nutrient density of this apple versus that's conventional versus this apple that's organic versus this one that's like seasonal and local and like picked at a certain time and all this sort of stuff. It's just an apple. I think as we get a better sense of the nutrient density of what we're actually putting in our bodies, whether that's from like like I'm doing mass spectrometry at my house, just like measuring the micronutrient density of a bunch of like foods or something, or it's not at the retailer level, or it's just like a more known thing that people talk about. I don't know. But I think that the other way that like ReGen could be 50% of sales by 2050 is like if we have a better understanding of how regenerative ag impacts nutrient density of different foods that are raised via regenerative methods, and if consumers are actually being responsive to micronutrient density as like a driving factor in their sort of purchase decisions. Like I know I would, if I was like, this conventional apple has like 1/10 of the micronutrient density that like a regenerative apple is, and it's like the ReGen one's like 10% more expensive, I'm going to buy the ReGen apple. It's just like, I think that there's this category of things that you just need to make more legible and bring into a consumer's awareness so that they can make that decision for themselves. But yeah, I think that if we move in the direction of having like micronutrient style, like nutrition labels, or even just get a better sense of the nutrition density from conventional all the way to regenerative, I think that like it'll give the consumers a chance to actually like spend more money and vote with their wallets on something that can like make their lives and health better.
You love that answer.
Yeah, you hit on all three of the big buckets that we get all the time, and I think you summarized it really well. It's economics, climate, health. That's it. If we can connect ReGen Ag to those three things, it's going to be a winner, and we're going to figure it out.
Has anyone else given the micronutrient answer before?
Tim's got an interesting answer. where he wants to put a better nutrition label on the front of his product to say, like, this is not just what's in my food and have it be more robust than the current, USP that we have to use, but also include what's not in the label. What's not in his food. Mm-hmm. So the glyphosate and everything else. So it's a little bit of a different take on what you had described, but I think it's still very much in the same vein.
Mm-hmm. Totally. That's really cool.
Yeah. Dude, thanks so much for joining us, man. Awesome conversation. Love what you're doing and just appreciate you.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
For show notes and more information on our guests and what we discuss on the show, check out our website, regen-brands.com. That is regen-brands.com. You can also check out our YouTube channel, ReGen Brands Podcast, for all of our episodes with both video and audio. The best way to support our work is to give us a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast platform and subscribe to future episodes. Thanks so much for tuning into the ReGen Brands Podcast, brought to you by the ReGen Coalition and Outlaw Ventures. We hope you learned something new in this episode, and it empowers you to use your voice, your time, and your dollars to help us build a better and more regenerative food system. Love you guys.